Hello everyone, welcome into our family room. Blessed to have you with us today. You know, what are those moments in your life? Those moments when things just change on a dime. When you're asked to do something you weren't quite ready for yet. When you suddenly get that opportunity to do something special, but it kind of overwhelms you a little bit. How do you handle those moments? For me, it seems kind of sublime, to be honest, but one of those moments in my life was when I first had the opportunity to drive my grandpa around. You see, I had just gotten my permit to start driving and to learn to start driving. I was using what was my dad's car. It was a huge yellow station wagon, Chevy Impala station wagon, 1977. It was so long. Everybody at Forest View High School knew that car as the Banana-mobile. It was a great car, but it was a fun car to learn to drive in because it was big and I had to learn how to park in that thing. So anyway, I had had my permit for maybe a month at the most. And my mom one day asked me to drive my grandpa to the store to get a few things. My grandparents had come in from Florida to visit us. You know, I had already driven my mom and my dad around just a little bit. I had been to one driving school class. All of a sudden I'm supposed to drive my grandpa around. I was a tad bit intimidated. My grandpa was known for being kind of tough and strict, and so I was really worried that he was going to be harping at me the whole time I was driving him around. Actually, the exact opposite happened. He was very graceful through the whole thing. I'm pretty sure that I gave him whiplash coming to a stop at the intersection of Gulf and Bussey in Mount Prospect, but he had nothing bad to say. Everything was supportive that afternoon. He did a wonderful job of helping me to learn to drive. It was one of those special moments because number one, they lived in Florida, so I didn't get to see them all that often. And number two, all of a sudden as a high school kid, I was now driving my grandfather around instead of my grandpa or my parents driving me around. It was kind of one of those moments where everything had flipped on a dime. Our gospel this week is similar to that. We read that Peter tells Jesus to let him walk on the water as Jesus is walking on the water. It's the story where Jesus is walking across the water in a storm to the boat, and the disciples are all scared and they're not sure if it's Jesus or a ghost. And Peter literally challenges Jesus and says, "If it is you, call me to walk out on the water to you." And Jesus gives this great response. He literally looks at Peter and says, "Come." I always kind of wonder in that moment what was going through Peter's mind. I'm not sure that Peter expected Jesus to say, "Okay, come, let's walk on the water." But here he was. So Peter takes that first step out onto the water, and for a moment he stands on the water until he begins to panic. He gets overwhelmed by the moment, and Jesus gracefully grabs his hand and pulls him to safety. You know, it's interesting. Peter, in that moment, his whole life, his ministry, if you will, changed. Jesus literally challenged him to do the same miracle that Jesus was doing. It had to be overwhelming. It had to make Peter proud, happy, excited, and of course scared all at the same time. But he did it. He took that first step. And yes, his fear overwhelmed him. Yes, he panicked. Yes, Jesus had to grab hold of his hand. But Peter took that first step. And that is what matters. Because ultimately, down the road, after Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension into heaven, it would be Peter, amongst others, who led the early church. On this night, he took that first step out of the boat, out of his comfort zone, and out into the storm. He was overwhelmed, but what a blessing. We've all had those moments. What are yours? When have you been called out to step out of the boat, to take that first step into a new journey, to experience what it is to become more than you have ever been before. We are blessed. We are called. We are all invited to step outside the boat, to step outside our comfort zone, and to become more than we have ever been before. Thanks be to God. Amen.